Great. I'm so excited to be here with our phenomenal panelists today at the Graph+AI Summit 2022, focused on retail. We have about 30 or 40 minutes to have our discussion, and I'll be guiding our discussion and really looking forward to our panelists and the interaction. But let me tell our audience what we're going to do. So first, of course, we're going to meet our distinguished panelists, about which I'm super excited, and I hope you are too. And then we're going to focus on three main areas of discussion today at a fairly holistic level, but nonetheless. First, we're going to focus on AI demand and adoption in retail. And then we're going to segue and talk about a small piece of data management and strategy, because it's a huge topic and we could spend all of our time just on that, but we're not going to do that today. And then we're going to use these foundational elements to talk about the place and the value of graph technology. We're going to reference some use cases, and we're going to talk about why we're excited about graph. So again, this is a bit of a holistic discussion, and we won't be taking a technical deep dive for our audience, but there should be some information in the chat about other sessions at the summit that will complement this discussion, whether technically or if you want to get into specific deep dive use cases like Customer 360, on graph, etc. So watch your chat. And if there's something in there that resonates, please attend that session. Okay, so thanks for your patience while I queue everything up. Let's get to the exciting part, which is meeting our panelists. So I'm going to ask Dinan and Wei and Manish to introduce themselves. So Wei, how about we start with you?
Sure. Wei Manfredi here. I'm leading architecture and solutioning practice at Google Cloud, specifically for retail and CPG industry. And before I joined Google, I spent many years, 20-some years in retail industry. And I been the dreamer for the future of retail for many years.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dinan, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I lead all our data and analytics work in the consumer products, retail, and services space for Capgemini in North America. And that really means helping our clients from the beginning of the phase, from the data strategy and what do we want to achieve, what's our vision and strategy, to the architecture, to the engineering, the data management, and the data science, getting real business value from the data and analytics work.
Oh, excellent. I'm so excited about that part of our conversation, well, all of it overall. And then finally, Manish, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Adina, thanks for having me. I'm the founder and CTO at Reltio. We started Reltio in 2011, and we are focused on data value acceleration. When you think about the data challenge today, the core data that your business runs on is extremely fragmented and siloed, and we provide the capabilities as a cloud-native SaaS platform where you can stitch together and unify the view of customer, supplier, product, or any such data domain and bring it to fruition to drive your business efficiency and growth. And that's the work that we have been doing at Reltio.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And I just love the way you slipped your marketing message in there. Well done, you. All right. So listen, on that note, why don't we get started? So I'm going to guide us through the conversation. I do have some questions that are going to open up the discussion for us. But the first part of our discussion is really, again, holistically focused on AI demand and adoption in the retail industry. And let me just say for myself, my name is Dina Lawrence, and I lead the retail and CPG industry strategy here at Tiger Graph. I've been a longtime retail and CPG practitioner in the technology, consulting, and business strategy space globally. So I assume that, like myself, we're all super passionate about our industries. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. But let me set the stage with a few projections and statistics to get us started. So in a 2021 IDC study, projected worldwide revenues for AI market, and that included software, hardware, and services, was forecast to grow 16.4% year over year, starting in 2021. And it was projected that segment spending will get to $98 billion by the end of 2023, next year. And by 2024, the market is expected to break the $500 billion mark with a 5-year CAGR of 17.5%. That all sounds really impressive, right? That's very macro. Gartner narrows it down a little bit more just in terms of AI software revenue. And they forecast that to be about 62.5 billion this year, and increasing 21.3% from last year, 2021. And then finally, retail specific, there's a 2021 Juniper study that reckons global retail spending on AI would reach US $7.3 billion annually by this year, up from a $2 billion spend in 2018. That's huge. And that the investments in AI-powered predictive and prescriptive analytics would more than double in that same time frame. All right, so that's a lot of numbers, but I think, and obviously things are changing and the acceleration is big. We'll see what happens, but those are impressive numbers. Let me just say before I dive into some questions that we as consumers, all of us, our audience and us, we've all lived the factors that have accelerated digital imperatives, right? Irrespective of the industry, but certainly in retail. So consumer technology has been a really big driving advancement. And at this point, just to level set for our audience members, because I don't want to assume that everybody here is an expert, most of us have experienced some of that acceleration, right? Conversational AI chatbots for services enhancement, online product recommendations, intelligent digital assistants, right? These are all great examples of the type of AI that I think is becoming a little bit more ubiquitous in our industry and that we as consumers interact with. And so just one more thing before I dive into questions, which is, again, for our non-retail focused audience members, I want to make sure it's clear that without being exhaustive, some typical industry metrics for retail include cost reduction, accuracy improvements, driving better conversion, increasing customer lifetime value, increasing the shopping, the per occasion shopping value and basket value, reducing risk, whether fraud, loss, or other, et cetera. So I just want to give people a grounding for this, right? So with all of that foundation, and I think we all accept that industry digital imperatives have accelerated over the last 2 years for many obvious reasons at a pace that was not really expected, right? So Wei, I'm going to start with you because I love your point of view. So how is the acceleration of industry digital imperatives and changes in demand and adoption having an impact on cloud and offerings in retail?
So one of the biggest surprise after I joined Google that I found out is, given Google is the strongest probably search provider, and with I would say rather the top-notch engineering teams inside Google, and the various hundreds of products offered by Google Cloud, right? The highest demand products or solutions from our customers, they are all, majority of them relate to the data and AI. So that's what I'm seeing, right? So from my experience before I joined Google, working in the industry, especially retail consumer side, that's where most of the investment money goes to, right? So it's really about understanding three things and the relationship among them, right? So it's really about my customer, who they are, what's their intent, what's the context they're coming to my site or my store, right? How can I know them better and elevate them, help them, right? So that's one. Second is a product, right? It's really about, what kind of product I can offer to what kind of customers and at when and in which location, right? So it's second domain is really about product. The third one, of course, channel. So one of the things I think a pandemic definitely changed the speed of the channel side is really nowadays we have seen the number, like a given shopping experience, you have minimum 2 channels involved, right? So typical ones we think about, hey, it's the e-commerce side and the store side, buy online, pick up in store. But in reality, it's not. We probably all use mobile phone to search for that certain product, to check on price. We probably heard that product from social media channels, right? So all of that, and and the connection among them, and be able to get insight from that, you really need to leverage machine, because those relationships are not that direct, right? So that's what I'm seeing, and why, the AI investment and along with the data management, and how do we get more data in real time and be able to derive the inside out and be able to act on that, become the major investment area for lots of retail companies.
Great, thank you. It's so interesting, and I would love to get into it deeper. We don't have the time to do that, but the comment around channels is so compelling, right? Because obviously channel proliferation equals data proliferation, right? And the journey, the customer journey, it's constantly changing. And I think what I took away partly from your point is the differentiation between me as a consumer purchasing in a channel versus me as a consumer using different channels to get to that point of purchase, right? And again, that channel proliferation and that journey proliferation really equates to data proliferation. And it makes it more challenging and further away to be able to your point, know your customers, know what products you need to be offering your customers, products and services, and how to do that very effectively for your own organizational and industry goals, right? All right, so all really good stuff. I'm curious to ask Dinand, so in your work at Capgemini, do specific retail segments seem to be further ahead with their digital maturity, AI digital maturity, I should say, and use case technology adoption in terms of value creation? What are you seeing that? I'm very curious because, and let me explain just very quickly, when I think about the different segments in retail, because often we talk about retail is a big entity, right? And there are different segments inside the entity, so to speak. So are you seeing specific retail segments that seem to be further ahead with maturity and use case adoption?
Yeah, you see quite a distinction in different parts of retail. And let me extend the category a little bit. Of course, retail and CP, you have to see them in conjunction.
Agreed.
And then in retail, of course, you have specific segments, but let's include something like the restaurants as well, quick service restaurants, the QSRs. And then look at it at different functions as well. So, whether it's the consumer market insights function or the marketing function or the supply chain function or the sales function. So I would say across, for example, the consumer products area, in the CP domain, you see lots of emphasis on the sales side, revenue growth management, whether it's on pricing or price spec architecture and such, a lot of advancement there. Or also in the CP market in the broader sense, in consumer market insights, leveraging broader, wide variety of data sources to understand what are the consumer trends and such. Retail as a whole, you have convenience stores are making a lot of investments now as well in terms of understanding their consumers, understanding what their habits are, and fulfillment. Apparel's been quite active as well, coming I would say from the supply chain and the fulfillment side, and from there on extending up and down the value chain. And other segments, I think grocery's always been a unique one. Grocery's sort of been propelled by the pandemic in terms of fulfillment, curbside pickup, the online channels and such, and that's really created an acceleration of the investments and the development of online ordering, fulfillment, personalization, and such. So that's had quite an advancement. And even if you look now, if you want to order something online, and just to see where it's in stock and what the availability is, and if you can pick it up and when and such, the convenience now and the ability now is a lot more than it was 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's driven by disruption. You even see it now again on the crisis we have at the moment, for example, in the US with baby formula, which drives an increased necessity of insight into what's in stock, how is the supply chain doing, and such. So I see that groceries invested a lot in those domains. So I wouldn't say it's a one size fit all, but different functional areas per different players in the broader retail segment.
Oh, excellent, thank you. And listen, I wanted to let everybody know, I do have questions to guide our discussion. But in these questions, please feel free to jump in and respond to anything that anybody is saying. It makes for a very robust and a very good discussion. So thank you for that, Dinan. And then Manish, what's your point of view on how digital acceleration and AI adoption is challenging the industry on the topic? And we're going to get more into data and data management strategy, but how is the industry being challenged on the topic of data and data management strategy?
Yeah, Dina, if you think about the digital acceleration and AI adoption, there are two things that come to mind. One is the speed of change that we are experiencing versus the speed of business that we need to operate at. And the second one is, from the landscape that we serve, the experience at the point of engagement. Almost every company has to now react to this faster ability to provide the experience at the point of engagement. And there are multiple channels, as you talked about, which leads us back into how much more automated can those experiences be, or what kind of data can power those experiences at the point of engagement. And this is where the whole notion of real time, doing it at speed and scale, and doing it without human intervention in the process is becoming extremely important, which is leading everybody to the conclusion that the way to solve for it is the digital acceleration and the AI adoption. And as Dinan mentioned, across different segments of the retail market or the retail vertical, we are seeing different flavors of this come to fruition.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's such a rich and broad topic. I wish we had an hour to devote to every single part of this discussion today. But having said that, this is a good foundational piece, and I want to go ahead and move on and talk a little bit more about data management strategy and really data effectiveness. Okay, and I recognize that, again, we can't dive super deeply into it, but for our audience, let me level set and say that we as the collective we have been talking about AI. Here, at least in America, you see that language becoming more ubiquitous, right? I'm not suggesting that everybody understands what it means 100%, but it's becoming more mainstream, and certainly it's becoming more adopted. In this discussion, we're talking about AI and harnessing AI to analyze, interpret, support, and automate, right? And that, of course, requires using data. As longtime retail folk, I hope it'll resonate when I say we've been talking about data-driven decision-making and harnessing the power of data for a long time in retail, right? It is not a new conversation. It is not a new experience. As consumers, and again, this will resonate with everybody, a common experience, just to illustrate, that we as consumers have, which can be frustrating, it can be time consuming, it can be many things. But for example, not being known by the businesses with which we transact, or not having consistent experiences, to everybody's point, across channels, right? Why, when I've plugged in my authentication information, do you have to get on and ask me for it all over again? It's not frictionless, right? It's irritating, but more importantly, it breaks down the relationship. So often these businesses and channels aren't operating on unified data, right? Whether they're a customer facing operation, or we're talking about more of an enterprise internal business process type of situation. So let's shift and talk about, just for a minute, underlying strategy, which the technology should enable. So I'm going to open this up. This is a question for everyone. What are the challenges for setting a data strategy and managing data effectively at an enterprise level and scale? And I'm just going to pick somebody to go first. Dinan, why don't you lead us with this? So again, what are the challenges for setting a data strategy and managing data effectively at an enterprise level and scale?
I think a key thing is to marry the business and the data and IT side. That's where we always see some of the challenges, and that they're not executed in isolation. Because end of the day, let's say the applications, the data aren't useful at all unless you use it for some business goal. And that's always going to be the key thing. Defining that strategy, how we want to become a data-powered enterprise, what business value we want to create. That goal and that ambition is usually easy to formulate, the roadmap as well, but executing it in collaboration between those pillars, that's going to be crucial. And we see increasingly from our clients is that creating that business value, not just talking about we want to migrate our data from this legacy infrastructure to the cloud. We want to set up this data infrastructure. We need to look at data governance and MDM and such. Those are all foundational things, but they don't deliver value yet. They are a cost play. Then you get to, then how do we get the value from it? What are the use cases in terms of supply chain or consumer market insights or in terms of personalization, marketing and such? That's where you really get your bang for the bucks. And making sure that these teams collaborate in conjunction, that they're combined teams of business and IT and data, leveraging that for those use cases, that's going to be crucial. But also seeing that in conjunction with all of your value chain partners. At Capgemini, we talk about this collaborative data ecosystem. It's not just your data. It's not just the consumer's data, zero-party data, but it's everyone in the value chain. How do you share that? And that can be different levels of sharing, without divulging anything you don't want to, but still getting the benefit from it. How do you work in such a collaborative ecosystem to get that value as all of the partners, whether it's in the supply chain side, that's an easy use case, or understanding consumer trends and such.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, Dinan. I'm going to circle back around to you in a moment and dig into collaborative data ecosystems a little bit more on the granular level. Before I do that, though, Wei, I would love to pose the same question. What are the challenges for setting a data strategy and managing data effectively at that enterprise level?
So one is definitely business value, right? So we need to focus on that versus a perfect architecture or technology. Those are just enabler for business values. So that's right. We need to be really laser focused on that. Second is speed. So that includes, the speed of data signals that can be leveraged, also the speed of the business value or use cases to be delivered. Business cannot wait for another 6 months to address a supply chain problems they are facing, right? If there's an inventory visibility problem, you got to start to prove out at the baby step towards the end goal. So those are, definitely is a much bigger challenge. Now, second challenge I've seen definitely is on the data traceability and the lineage point of view. For enterprise, often, we all know from retail side, a lot of systems and functions that they are in silos still, right? So then, in order to leverage connected data, you copy data over and over again, right? In order to create models, insights on top of that. And then multiple copies later, you lost traceability of where the data come from, who's actually leveraged my data. So in my opinion, this is a must-have if you really want to get into data management. Make sure you have a visibility of where the data come from and who's using my data. And have a data catalog, data lineage, traceability enabled as a step.
That is an awesome point. I love that point. And we are going to touch on connectedness in a minute. But before we do that, Manish, I'd like to hear your point of view on the exact same question.
Yeah. Some of the biggest challenges that we see come from the lack of alignment at the business stakeholder level, because everybody has sort of this motherhood and apple pie type of construct in mind, where if we have better data, we will have better outcomes. But quantifying that value and tying it to the different the value delivered to the business stakeholders is the part where either it takes too long to get to that type of baseline, or the lack of alignment forces people to go down the wrong path overall in these types of programs. So making sure that we have a thesis starting with what is the business value and what is the acceleration to that business value will lead to better outcomes, because at the end of the day, the data or the better handle around the data and the data strategy is still key. But the tie-in to the business value is the key piece that we should try and leverage or focus on as a starting point of that journey.
Excellent, thank you. Those are all so valid. I know that we as practitioners in the retail industry have seen instances of everything we've just talked about multiple times. I'm going to quote Capgemini, back to Capgemini. So Capgemini reports that a minority of organizations, 39%, are able to turn data-driven insights into a sustained competitive advantage, right? And I think too, when we think about the acceleration that we've been talking about, what we're also seeing is just new models, new operational models, new service models, new business models moving forward, right? I found the Capgemini report on data ecosystems really, really interesting. And of course, most of us are aware of one of the most common, I believe 55% of this in organizations, which is that aggregate type of data information and sharing model. But Danon, tell us more about collaborative data ecosystems, which, if I'm not wrong, Capgemini estimates is about represented at about 11% in the current organizational model. And what does that mean to data strategy moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And collaborative data ecosystems is super interesting because you see lots of developments in that space, lots of tiny steps being taken in terms of how can we get more value from our data by combining it with that of other organizations in our value chain. Whether it's in the field of supply chain or marketing or let's say personalization or whatever. And the key thing is by combining your data with that of other players in your value chain, you can get much more insight and much more efficiency, increased revenue, lower costs and such in whatever space. So what we've seen is that first of all, there's a revenue impact by sharing data with players in your value chain. Let's say understanding when you need certain products, the distribution of that and such. You have a 9% impact on the revenue, so 9% more revenue because of that sharing and because of the way you collaborate with your partners. Also, we've seen from research is that it has a double-digit increased fixed asset turnover, and also there's a much higher market cap for those players. Practically, what does it mean? It means not just doing that transactional sharing of, for example, point of sale data between a retailer and a CP company and getting your benefits from that, but really with all of your suppliers and such. When are certain products coming in? What's the inventory? What's the status with raw materials? Can we predict if we're going to have enough supply in the coming period to meet consumer demands and such? And much more fine-grained, also at the very specific level, not just at, for example, in the US at state level and then at city level and such, but even at store-specific level. Now, I understand as well, sometimes you are open to collaborating, but not open to sharing everything and such. And in such a collaborative data ecosystem, you can have different levels, different tiers of sharing. You can open up the insights while not disclosing all of the data and such, and still being able to build on that together. And especially in this market where you're going to have more disruptions, more uncertainty and such, looking at all of these data feeds specifically, collaborating with all of your partners is going to be crucial to meet that uncertainty. And actually, in that context, Wei, I have a question for you. If you look at it from a Google perspective, because you have dual role. On the one hand, you're sitting on a lot of data from search and all of the customers you have and such, and at the same time, you also provide that platform to your customers and allow them to do the analytics and that data sharing. Are you seeing any trends, for example, in the field of what I would call data-driven scenario planning, understanding uncertainty to meet that and overcome that preemptively?
Excellent question.
Yeah, that's definitely. I was just going to dive in that subject area, because that is really, I hear a lot of requests from both sides, retail side and the CPG side. Both have the desire to enhance this data collaboration, right? So, for example, the recent request essentially is around the two topics. One is more CPG companies want to activate insight on the retail channel in more near real time, right? They don't want to do behind the scene analytics. They have the insights. They want to be able to activate it. For example, real-time promotion and pricing, for example, right? So that's one side. They want a real-time activation. Now, another side, CPG, also retail is also provide a lot of innovative product ideas to the CPG companies. For example, for a certain region, right, a certain size of detergent actually sells a lot better than different size of detergent. Just like that simple, right? And then also CPG companies, because they have a lot broader view of their product, they also provide insights to retail. It's like what kind of product you put together actually can increase the basket size for customers, right? So all this collaboration is going on. And I have to say is given Google and other companies in the space for data sharing, collaboration, and activation on both ways, the technology actually developed, or I would say it's still not at the state of mature enough or secure enough, and the both party feel like we're comfortable to run in full speed.
Got it. That was a great question. Thank you for that, Danan, and thank you, Wei, for the response. It would be remiss of me if at this point I didn't ask a question, Wei, which I think a lot of people would like to hear you speak to, which is, what is the real impact to retail of phasing out third-party cookies, especially around personalization and related issues?
So really, really short answer. You cannot depend on other parties to provide your customer insights, just like that simple. So action item, if you don't have customer data platform yet, it's about time. Tonight you need to start to think about that.
I love your answer. I love your answer. Okay, so I embrace that answer 100%. I agree. You cannot depend on other parties to provide your organization what is essentially insight into the relationship you have today and the relationship you want to build, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. I love it that it was a short and targeted answer. Let me ask one follow-up question, Wei, and then I've got a question for Manish. What is the importance of data connectedness, and how does that fit in to this? How does that fit into the topics we're talking about from your point of view? I know it's a big question. I've left it broad. You can choose how you want to address.
Right. So to me, it's nowadays purchasing a product is not just about product, right? It's my motivation, what's going on in my life, and sometimes it's even my emotions as a customer, right? And then given from product angle point of view, right? It's not just meet a demand for customer, right? So it's also an image. For example, it's an image of my brand, right? Am I doing something good for the society? On top of given, that meet the need of customers at material level, right? So everything is start connected. You cannot just separate them anymore. Not mentioning to fully understand the 360 of customer or 360 of your product, all the data elements need to play the role there. So that's why the connectivity from end to end, right? Like Dino mentioned, from make, move, sell, ship, all the way, the value chain, those data all needs to be connected.
Great, thank you. So what I heard is retail therapy is real. No, I'm just joking, but yes, I think we would all agree that connectivity is crucial, right? And it came up at the very beginning of our conversation, right, about silos. I mean, we all know that is a real situation and many organizations, and it's hard to solve for, and there are a lot of reasons why, which we're not going to get into. But Manish, I have a question for you, which, through the Reltio lens of these challenges that we're talking about, strategic and tactical, for you, where does the topic of disconnected data and the importance of connectedness land?
Very high on the radar, extremely high on the radar. And a few different reasons for it. First of all, if you look at the enterprise landscape today, early 2000s, we used to have companies run on 5 or 6 different systems. Now those same businesses are running on 500 to 600 different applications. And this doesn't even count the number of third-party data sources that they're bringing in to better inform their decision making. The second thing, that brings it very high on the radar is this notion of connectedness, which is, when you think about the constructs that are very applicable today, and Wei mentioned this, think about farm to fork. When we say farm to fork, we have to understand where a specific product was grown, how it was packaged, where was it shipped to, how was it handled, who supplied that product, which restaurant did it land at, and then, where did it end up on the menu? There is almost an entire value chain that needs to be captured from a connected data standpoint in order to understand that entire supply chain.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, going back to the first point, if you think about the fact that we have to, in order to get to better outcomes, better decisions, better intelligence, we have to bring the data together from these different systems. And by the way, there is no one single schema that fits it all. You have to leverage the concepts of graph as the building block for that type of connected system.
Oh my goodness, that was a perfect end statement, a segue to the next part of our conversation. Thank you very much. Yeah, that is so true. This question of data connectedness has been a struggle for a long, long time, right? And so with that, I want to transition us to the final part of our conversation, which is really about how graph drives value. So I want to offer a basic understanding of graph for our audience, because I certainly hope that we have a range of people, from people who have a really good understanding of the things we're talking about to people who are here to get a better understanding of the things we're talking about, right? So let me level set. So Gartner describes graph as, and I quote, relating everything, operational and analytical use cases focused on interconnected domains and relationships. I'll go a step further and quote Tiger Graph's own Alan Deutsche as saying that graphs are particularly good at allowing the user to think about, discover, and learn about connections between data items, right? And then for our audience, in terms of language, if you hear us talk about nodes and edges or vertices, just think of it this way. In terms of language, graph nodes represent the object we want to model, and the edge or the vertices is the relationship between them. And it's more intuitive from how we as humans actually think about things than other types of database structures, right? Let me throw a stat out and then we're going to dig in, okay? So one analysis projects that 80% of data and analytics innovations will be made using graph technology by 2025. And that's in contrast to 10% in 2021, last year. All right, it's an impressive number. Let's see how that all plays out. A couple of points and then we're going to dig in. First, with graph technology, data points stored in a graph database are able to connect with multiple other data points at any given time. And that enables deeper, faster, and more accurate data exploration, right? So the key concepts there are that graph is both distributed and connected, which is important because we've just had a conversation about the connectedness and some of the challenges, right? And then this technology also demonstrates very positive performance with large data set and flexibility in adding to the graph structure, which is important because we've all been in organizations or been with customer organizations that tried to adopt a technology, but unfortunately, the friction involved in actually getting it operational and deriving insights that were actionable was very challenging, right? We've all had that experience. So Wei, I'm going to start with you because I know you are a huge proponent of graph technology in retail and CPG, and I want to hear why you're so positive and what you think graph means for the industry.
So again, like you mentioned, it's in all the use cases we're talking about, yes, it's about the thing object, but it's really is about a relationship, right, among the things between me and the product, between the product with the brand, right? It's all about relationship. And of course, Graph actually is to my knowledge, is the technology that takes relationship as a first citizen, right? Others is that take the object entity as a first citizen. So in the retail space is all about relationship, right? From product recommendation, that's the more high level, from supply chain visibility even, right? Yeah. It's all about relationship. And or even go a little bit low level, like we talking about, I know Manish is the founder of a Realtel. It's even you want to stitch my 360 profile together, it's all about relationship. And how do you identify those relationships and be able to stitch them together, right? So in retail space, for example, very basic thing, for C360, I need an ID resolution, right? Be able to stitch that together. I need to leverage those. And then most importantly is not the obvious relationship, right? If I have my email and then you have another set of data has the same email, it's easy to stitch. But what if I use different email, but have some common elements that is where Graph shines, is really be able to derive non-obvious relationship from the existing relationship, right? Be able to find a correlation there. And that's where the recommendation side is all about leveraging that graph type of relationship. So everywhere, right? So from customer ID resolution to all the way supply chain end-to-end traceability, and to product, like a CPG side, right? A SKU given product from make all the way to retail partner sales that, the SKU often change. How do you make sure that is the product from end to end? Those are all the use cases could leverage graph databases.
That's so great. So Tiger Graph has been working with a major retailer here in the US that, in addition to other assets, has 5 digital properties. And, the application around what you're talking about, entity or ID resolution, as well as customer 360, which I think in this context, we're talking about accurate and effective recommendation engines to help with that personalization, that relationship. That's what we've seen. Several, I would say customer 360 and entity or ID resolution are the applications. And inside those applications are many use cases, right, for retailers, and the business value that we assign to the different use cases within those larger applications are significant, right? One of the things you mentioned in terms of ID or entity resolution is a different, it's not necessarily a different idea, it's a different approach, but also building those household views if you can, as well. That's something Tiger Graph has been working on with one of the customers here in the United States, and just looking at the business impact, the quantifiable business impact on that, right? Because we talk about relationship, but at the end of the day, while we mean that in many ways, we also mean, what does that mean to our business quantitatively, right? And then in terms of that personalization, Tiger Graph has also been working quite a bit on the customer 360 and recommendation engine type of use cases, including other areas like digital fraud and retail and some supply chain mapping, et cetera. So Manish, I want to come back to you and go back to the whole concept of data management and strategy. So help us understand, how do MDM and Graph work together functionally and conceptually?
Yeah, Dina, that's a great question. And Wei, sort of walked us through some parts of it. But if you think about master data management, this type of a concept has been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. But the issue with what was created more than 2 decades ago, or the previous generation of capabilities, was that there are limits or boundaries to what you can do with those types of systems, because they were defined on a relational data model. There were some inherent limits to what those systems could do. And when you think about the type of problem that today's modern data management solutions need to solve for from a master data point of view, the number of systems that you're going to integrate into the mix is unknown and increasing. It's not decreasing, it's increasing. the number of entities or objects that you need to manage is increasing. You know, is there a customer out there that you work with who says we have a year over year smaller number of customers to manage or smaller number of products to sell? The answer is no.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to have the larger customer base, which means that that number will continue to increase and grow. And then on top of that, the attribution, you know, when you think about personalization or understanding what you should be promoting at any given point in time, you need to understand more detailed attribution about who you are serving as the customer. And, you know, if those are the constructs of the problem, there is no way that relational databases can scale to or address those types of problems in today's world. And Graph becomes the answer to solving those problems, even in the master data management construct. And that's the approach that we have taken in terms of creating the Reltio product, making it available to our customers, and, you know, define this new foundation on graph-based capabilities.
Terrific.
So that's the way we have been going about and solving the problem.
Terrific. Thank you. And Danan, let's go back to the concept of collaborative data ecosystems. I find it very interesting. Can you say something about how graph technology relates to evolving data models and strategies in your world?
Building on what Manish was saying, I mean, there's not one schema, there's not a super schema, there's not an industry schema, but there's a multitude of them. So first of all, that complicates things. So you need graph technology to understand the context and understand the interrelation of data, not just for C3 Customer 360, but also to understand, let's say, the relation between data across the value chain that has an impact between various partners. So if you take these multitude of schemas and then you bring in this diversity of data partners that you're going to be working with, of course, that complicates it tremendously. But if you then leverage graph technology, you can see it in its context, you can understand the relationship. And I almost like to call it, it will enable you to follow the butterfly. We know that the butterfly effect is something that has an impact somewhere in the value chain, from farm to fork and such. All of these steps along the value chain, there's going to be something that's going to happen that's going to have an impact down the line. You want to trace that. You want to be able to see what is the impact going to be. Leveraging graph technology, you can connect those different data sources and such, understand the context, see what the business impact is going to be, and then take mitigation measures. I don't know if you've ever seen, I think it was the third season of Westworld, the TV.
Oh my God, love it.
It was a bit noir, and I was a big fan of them. In the third season, they had this AI system, Rehoboam. It was a bit noir, of course, and it was a bit dark. But that was monitoring everything, all of the trends going on in society, and what's the impact going to be, and how can we overcome that?
Right.
Think of it in a positive way. Look across your value chain. What's the impact going to be on, for example, an ecological disaster somewhere in the world, in terms of the food you can produce, and in terms of what you can ship and how you can serve your consumers and how you can overcome that and such. That ideally is something you want to do with this data-driven scenario planning in a collaborative data ecosystem, leveraging graph technology. So we have all of the acronyms in one sentence.
So we're going to have to wrap this up in a couple of minutes, but I love that you mentioned Westworld. A, I'm a fan, but B, it sets up this last piece of our discussion, because I wanted to talk just for a couple of minutes about the possible, right? So the potential, so again, a lot of the use cases we see out there with relation to graph is, again, customer 360 recommendation engines, you know, entity and ID resolution, fraud, supply chain mapping, and those are great. Those are fantastic. I would like to spend a minute and hear from each of us about what you're excited about in terms of the potential for graph use cases. I mean, I have to tell you, me personally, it's things like sustainability. It's things like workforce experience as big categories. You know, have I drilled down into these? I have not 100%, but I want to. And I feel excited particularly about these two areas of potential. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to hear from each of you. What is it about graph in terms of what we need to explore, what we should be exploring in terms of big categories or bigger categories that you find exciting potentially? How about you, Wei?
Well, to me, there are two things. Personally, I'm super interested in the mental fitness part.
Oh,
And I think there's a lot of elements goes into that, but a lot of that is really about the correlations and relationship there. That's the area I feel like a graph can play a huge role there. Now, another thing is from the retail side, we talk about channel. And channel is, they are emergent. It's really interesting, like a traditional retail channel and the media is emerging. And I also seen the so-called community e-commerce is emerging, right? Think about is really the future of purchase essentially is community driven, not just the product driven or brand driven anymore. And think about that. Community is all about relationship. So
100%.
I'm the dreamer, of course.
I love the dreamer. There's a place in my heart for the dreamer. Thank you. And how about you, Manish? Like, what excites you in terms of the potential of graph categorically?
Dina, the dreamer in me, I'm borrowing from Wei here. Our thesis is that applications that we use in the enterprise today are not going to own the data that they are running on. What I mean by that is that there has to be a separation between the data and the use of the data. And the data has to be organized as an organizational, institutional asset, which leads us to the interconnected nature of the data that is going to be a part of this fabric. And this is where, the possibilities with the graph, whether we call it the enterprise knowledge graph or, the interconnected data, that a business needs to run on, that has to be a constantly curated, always on 24/7 pool of information that any business runs on. And that's the state that we are headed towards. And graph is one of the ways in which we are going to make that come to fruition.
Oh, great. So large scale change from a foundational model perspective, how we operate basically.
Yes.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. And then Dinan, finally, I'd love to hear from you. What excites you in the potential of graph technology?
What I love about graph technology is that allows you to create an understanding in a very complex world, which will allow organizations, and I use that in the broader sense, to increase their adaptiveness and resilience. Practically speaking, you can bring all of that data from various parties together. You can understand the context and such, and see what do we need to change, what do we need to adapt. And I love the fact that you mentioned sustainability, because that's a massive priority for Capgemini and helping our clients and ourselves in terms of adapting there. But equally, whether it's with social resilience or whether it's with business resilience in terms of the supply chain and such, at whatever level you're looking at it, using graph technology, you can understand the relations, the complexity, and practically see what measures can I take to overcome this, and then see the impact of that, and then preempt potential disruptions.
Excellent. I would love to keep talking. We've actually gone over a little bit, but I think it was worthwhile. I want to thank all three of our fantastic panelists for making time to sit down with me today and talk through some of these issues. I hope that our audience was able to gain an understanding of these three areas of conversation if you weren't well versed to begin with. And if you were well versed to begin with, then we expect you to get in touch, because now you're so compelled that you just must. But no, in all seriousness, thank you again to Manish, to Wei, and to Dinan for making time today and for giving us your points of view. It's been incredibly valuable, and I hope you enjoyed this last hour. I certainly did. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.